After Israel's decision to halt aid into Gaza again, Britain, Germany and France have this afternoon issued a joint statement warning Benjamin Netanyahu he could be in breach of international law by halting the entry of aid. The statement calls on Israel to abide by its international obligations to ensure full, rapid, safe and unhindered provision of humanitarian assistance to the population in Gaza. It goes on to say that a halt on goods and supplies, such as that announced by the Israeli government, would risk violating international humanitarian law. Humanitarian aid should never be contingent on a ceasefire or used as a political tool. Let's talk now to Jasmine Al-Gamal, a former Middle East advisor at the Pentagon. Jasmine, great to have you on the show. This is quite a serious warning to Benjamin Netanyahu, but he's had them before and he's ignored them before, hasn't he?
That's right. And thank you so much for having me, Andrew. It is a really serious situation. I mean, this is not the first time Israel has either threatened to stop aid going into Gaza or has actually stopped aid into Gaza. If you'll remember, in the very early days, just after the October 7th attack, there were calls by Israeli leadership to stop all humanitarian assistance going into Gaza. No food, no water.
Cut water, exactly. I think, yes, and electricity, yes.
And it's on the basis of some of those statements that the ICC ended up issuing arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on the basis of using these starvation as a weapon. And so right now we're almost back to square one, where we're having the situation where we're at an impasse when it comes to the ceasefire negotiations moving into phase two. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is now halting all humanitarian aid into Gaza, probably hoping to pressure Hamas to agree to Israel's request to extend phase one and not go into phase two negotiations as previously agreed.
The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has made his support for Israel clear again and again and again, very, very emotional about the hostages situation and very supportive of Jewish people in Britain. So it would take quite a lot for the British government to put their signatures to this particular statement. But I guess the problem is that in the White House, they're going to think very, very differently about what Netanyahu is doing.
That's right, Andrew. And it's really not just a problem with the Trump administration. I mean, President Biden's administration did put pressure on Israel to allow humanitarian assistance in when the Israelis didn't want to, but it never reached adequate levels to match the population's needs. And in the end, President Biden really wasn't able to move the needle much when it came to Israeli actions in Gaza, and was never able to get the two sides to sign the ceasefire deal. If you remember, that signing happened only after President Trump came into office. So there was a sort of renewed sense of hope in the beginning that President Trump was coming in, saying that he wanted to be a president for peace and that he was going to solve the issue of wars in Gaza and Ukraine. And so there was a lot of optimism around what the U.S. role would be. But at the end of the day, it's actually come down to the fact that President Trump seems very unwilling to put any kind of pressure on Israel to do the right thing.
Jasmine, I was going to ask you about President Trump's slightly bizarre idea that Gaza would become a kind of beachfront Riviera with hotels and casinos and so forth. The trouble he's got is that people are going back already and rebuilding their lives already. And, you know, he's got a lot on his plate at the moment, not least Ukraine. But I haven't heard so much about that, including in the State of the Union address last night. Do you think this is one of the Trump ideas that's just going to kind of fade away and be forgotten?
Well, that's such an important question, Andrew, because I've always said from the beginning that this idea that Trump threw out in his press conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu, it was always going to be impossible to execute. And so the problem with it wasn't the idea itself that we were in danger of seeing it executed. The problem is that it has breathed new life into the Israeli right-wing establishment that has always wanted people removed from Gaza. And now that President Trump has said it, are using that as an excuse not to advance the ceasefire negotiations or, in fact, accept the Arab proposal that was just announced yesterday following the summit in Cairo, saying that this plan doesn't take into account current realities on the ground, that it's rooted in outdated perspectives, and that they haven't given Trump's idea a fair shake.
It's a doleful situation. Jasmine Al-Gamal, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC.